Hi friends, so I realized that last night I only read the prelude or prelude, so I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 1 as well. I have Boone here to help me out. I have my reader's notebook, which I hope you do as well, and then Luke is going to be helping out from afar. Lulu, you want to come over here? She doesn't. Okay. So let me share my screen so that you may read along with me. And we ended the prelude, remember, with Curzon not too sure what to think about this, this freedom. Chapter 1, Tuesday, October 7th, 1777. And this is a quote from General Horatio Gates's order to start the Second Battle of Saratoga. Begin the game. The memory of our escape still tormented me 9 months later. It did not matter that I'd found us shelter and work in New Jersey or that I'd kept us safe. Isabel was ungrateful, peevish, and vexatious. We argued about going after Ruth. Then we fought about it, and finally in May, she ran away from me, taking all of our money. I twisted my ear so hard it was near torn from my head. No thoughts of Isabel, I reminded myself. Find that blasted road. I'd been looking for the back road to Albany since dawn on account of my former boss. Trumbull was a cabbage head and a cheat. The Patriot Army had hired him and his 2 wagons, one of them driven by myself, to help move supplies up to the mountains near Saratoga. Thousands of British soldiers waited there, preparing to swoop down the Hudson, cut off New England from the other states, and end the rebellion. Trumbull cared not for beating the British or freeing the country from the king. He cared only for the sound of coins clinking together. With my own eyes, I saw him steal gunpowder and rum and salt from the barrels we hauled. He'd flinch anything he could sell for his own profit. 'Twas not his thieving from the army that bothered me. 'Twas his thieving from me. I'd been working for him for 3 months and had no coin to show for it. He charged me for the loan of a ragged blanket and for anything else he could think of, so he never had to hand over my wages. The night before, I'd finally stood up to him and demanded my money. He fired me. Of course, I robbed him. You would have done the very same. I stole an assortment of spoons and 4 shoe buckles from his trunk after he fell asleep muddy in drink and snoring loud as a blasting bellows. I put my treasures in the leather bag that held Isabel's collection of seeds and her blue ribbon, both left behind in her haste to flee from my noxious self. The leather bag went into my empty haversack, which I slipped over my shoulder as I crawled out of Trumbull's tent. I had walked for hours in the dark, quite certain that I'd stumble upon the road within moments. The rising sun burned through the fog, but did not illuminate any road for me, not even a path well worn by deer or porcupines. I climbed up a long hill, stopping at the top to retie the twine that held my shoes together. Should have stolen Trumbull's boots, too. I turned in a full circle. Most of the forest leafed yellow, with a few trees, bold cloaked in scarlet or orange. No road. Had I been in my natural environment, the cobbled streets of Boston or New York, I could have easily found my way by asking a cartman or an oyster seller. Not so in this forest. I headed down into a deep ravine, swatting at the hornets that buzzed around my hat. The ravine might lead to the river, and a river was as good as a road, only wetter. Because I was the master of my own mind, I did not allow myself to believe that I might be lost. Nor did I worry about prowling redcoats or rebel soldiers eager to shoot. But the wolves haunted me. They dug up the graves of the fellows killed in last month's battle at Freeman's farm and eaten the bodies. They'd eat a living man, too. A skinny lad like myself wouldn't last a minute if they attacked. I picked my way through the brush at the bottom of the ravine, keeping my eyes on the ground for any sight of paw prints. Crack! I stopped. Gunfire? Not possible. I was almost certain that I was well south of the dangerous bit of ground that lay between the 2 armies. Crack! Heavy boots crashed through the forest. Voices shouted. Crack! Boom! An angry hornet hissed past my ear and smacked into the tree trunk behind me with a low thump. I froze. That was no hornet. 'Twas a musket ball that near tore off my head. The voices grew louder. There was no time to run. I dropped to the ground and hid myself behind a log. A British redcoat appeared out of a tangle of underbrush a dozen paces ahead of me and scrambled up the far side of the ravine. 3 more British soldiers followed close on his heels, hands on their tall hats to keep them from flying off, canteens and cartridge boxes bouncing hard against their backsides. There was a flash and another crack, boom. A dozen rebel soldiers appeared, half in hunting shirts, the rest looking like they just stepped away from their plows. Smoke still poured from the barrel of the gun held by a red-haired fellow with an officer's black ribbon pinned to his hat. There was a loud shuffling above. A line of redcoats took their position at the edge of the ravine and aimed down at the rebels. "Present!" the British officer screamed to his men. "Present!" yelled the American officer. His men brought the butts of their muskets up to their shoulders and sighted down the long barrels, ready to shoot and kill. I pressed my face into the earth, unable to plan a course of escape. My mind would not be mastered and thought only of the wretched, lying, foul, silly girl who was the cause of everything. I thought of Isabel, and I missed her. Fire! I'm going to keep going because that was short and also very interesting. Don't forget to pause the video and take time to jot notes. I'm going to do that after I finish reading chapter 2. Chapter 2, Tuesday, October 7th, 1777. This is a letter from the 22-year-old George Washington describing his first taste of battle. I heard bullets whistle, and believe me, there is something charming in the sound. The muskets on both sides fired. Lightning flew from their barrels. The ravine darkened with gunpowder smoke and the curse of soldiers. I moved my toes in my sorry shoes, my fingers in the mud. I was still one shaking piece of Curzon. I peered at the 2 lines of soldiers. None were bleeding. Not a one had been hit. "Half cock your firelocks," a redcoat called, ordering the men to begin loading for the next shot. The rebels would not give them the time they needed. "Advance," bellowed the American officer. He charged across the bottom of the ravine, and his men followed, all pulling hunting knives or hatchets from their belts. In 2 heartbeats, they were halfway up the slope. "Fall back," the British yelled. "To the redoubt." They turned on their heels and ran, only a few steps ahead of the screaming rebels. After they disappeared, I counted 20, and then 20 more, without moving. Gunfire crackled in the distance, then faded. I forced myself to stay hidden and listened for the sound of cannon fire. The British and Americans had been skirmishing for weeks since September's battle ended in a draw. The Americans were desperate to push the British back into Canada before the winter hit. Some fellows said that there would be the one last battle, and that would be signaled by the firing of the cannons. The 2 armies would fight until blood soaked the ground. I listened. Geese honked high overhead. The wind shook the trees, sending the leaves twirling to the ground. There was another crackle, faraway muskets, but no cannon. The great battle had not begun. I stood, brushed the leaves and dirt from my hat, and set it on my head. I was well and truly lost. The only way out was to retrace my steps, past the shadows and the wolves. Just as I prepared to set out the way I came, I heard the sound of more boots crashing toward me. I hid behind the log again. "I said halt," shouted a voice. A short British soldier stumbled into the ravine, chased by a gap-toothed rebel boy near my age, white-skinned, uncommonly tall, and armed with an ancient musket. "Stop there," the boy yelled. The redcoat glanced behind him, caught his foot on a half-buried root, and fell hard. His musket flew from his hand, but he quickly crawled to it. "You are my prisoner, sir," the boy declared in a shaky voice. "Lay down your musket." The redcoat had no intention of becoming a prisoner. He pulled out a gunpowder cartridge, ripped it open with his teeth, and poured powder into his firing pan. His hands were shaking so violently that most of the powder fell to the ground. He pulled out a second cartridge and poured with care. When the pan was primed, he shut it and poured the rest of the powder down the barrel. "Stop!" The boy brought his musket up to fire. "I swear I'll shoot." He wiped his right hand on his breeches, then cocked the firelock and slipped his finger into the trigger guard. The redcoat fumbled in his shot bag for a lead musket ball. The boy squeezed the trigger. His flint hit the empty firing pan with a dull click. The musket did not fire. He'd forgotten to prime his pan. The redcoat pulled out his ramrod. The boy grabbed the cork out of his powder horn. My palms were sweating, my eyes going back and forth trying to figure who would win the race to load and shoot. A year earlier, I'd been a Patriot soldier, enlisted as a substitute for the man who owned me. When the British attacked us at Fort Washington, I spent the entire day loading muskets for other fellows to shoot with. I could prepare a musket for firing in my sleep. The redcoat rammed the musket ball the length of the barrel. The boy fumbled his powder horn. It dropped to the leaves. The redcoat pulled out his ramrod and threw it aside. He raised the barrel without a word. The gap-toothed boy was about to be slaughtered. I had to help. My fingers curled around a muddy rock. The boy filled his firing pan and shut it. The redcoat cocked his firelock and reached for the trigger. I rose up from my hiding place and threw the rock hard as I could. It hit the redcoat square in the shoulder and threw off his aim just as he squeezed his trigger. The redcoat stared in disbelief at the hole he'd shot in the dirt. Then the boy fired his gun. This time, the flint sparked the powder in the pan, which set off the powder in the barrel that exploded the bullet across the ravine and into the body of his enemy. The British soldier fell backwards, screaming, his hands clutched at his belly. He'd been gut shot. The musket ball had ripped his middle right open. He rolled back and forth, screaming, as the blood welled up, covering his hands, rushing out of him to flood the fallen leaves and the dirt. His boots twitched, his entire form shook, shuddered, and then he choked. The blood filled his throat, and his red-washed fingers clawed at his neck. Broken leaves flew into the air from the violence of his thrashing, and the gore and the blood kept pouring from the black hole in his belly from his mouth. Surely enough blood for 10 men, a sight horrid enough to make God himself weep. And suddenly his boots stopped running, and his form stilled, and then death caught him. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and definitely go back through chapters 1 and 2. There was a lot there, and jot in my reader's notebook, and then go back, read some more, continue to jot. If you get a chance, talk it through with someone at home. Otherwise, I will see you guys soon so we can have a book club conversation about what we read. Thanks for listening.